A single bite of steak, and the man knew he was being watched. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. It's always a thrill seeing where you're all from. Drop your location in the comments. Your messages truly bring this channel to life. Let's begin. It started with a steak. Not one on our plates, mind you. I hadn't even had the pleasure of sniffing a marbled ribeye all day, and that's a crime in itself in this household. No, this steak came up in conversation. Unusual enough, since most of our conversations don't begin with food unless Wolfe's the one talking, and when he is, it's about terrines, sauces, or the tragic misuse of tarragon. The caller's name was Della Wexler, and her voice over the phone had a kind of nervous crispness, like someone trying to keep it together while balancing on a cracked teacup. I'd answered with my usual smooth tone. I save my sarcasm for in person, and she'd said she was in urgent need of consultation but wouldn't say what kind. That was my first red flag. Anyone who needs Nero Wolfe urgently and won't explain why is either hiding something or hasn't read the brochure. She says it's private. I told Wolfe from the doorway of the plant rooms where he was coaxing a Mastrovalia into behaving. Won't give a hint unless she says it to your face. I am not a confessor, Wolfe replied without looking up. Nor a sponge for dramatics. She used the word delicate. You know how you love those. That got a grunt. After a beat he straightened and muttered, delicate is often a euphemism for distasteful. Fool. Still 10 minutes later he was back in the office chair with his yellow silk pajamas hidden beneath a brown robe, looking like a particularly testy Roman senator. Fritz brought him a glass of sherry and I showed in Miss Wexler. She was early 40s, somewhere between refined and frayed, like a well-kept garden right before the weeds win. Tailored navy dress, low heels, gloves she kept ringing in her lap like they'd insulted her. She sat in the red chair, the one that makes people feel like they're in a principal's office. I don't know how to say this without sounding absurd, she started. You may assume absurdity, Wolfe said without blinking. Begin. I believe someone is using steak to blackmail my husband. That was not the sentence I expected. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow, not both, just one, and I leaned against the desk to better watch the show. My husband, she said, is Marvin Wexler. He runs a private supper club called The Remnant. Very exclusive. Members only, reservations by invitation, menu never published. I knew the name. A couple of food critics called it hedonistic with a conscience. Supposedly the chef cooked everything like it was his last meal and yours. No prices listed, no photos allowed, and diners were required to leave their phones at the door like a ritual cleansing. Lately, she went on, Marvin's been agitated, secretive, distracted. Then 3 nights ago he cooked at home, which is rare, and served me a steak. Filet mignon. It tasted strange. How strange? Wolfe asked. Not spoiled, not badly prepared, but wrong, as though it was saying something. I coughed discreetly. Wolfe didn't look at me. Della Wexler wasn't smiling. After I mentioned it, she said. He turned pale. He asked if anyone had come by the house while he was out. Then he said he had to go meet someone. He didn't return until morning. And since then, Wolfe said, he's been watching me, as if waiting for me to say something. And last night someone left an envelope under our door. No note. Just a clipping from a newspaper about a former investor of Marvin's who was indicted 5 years ago, and a burned matchstick. Wolfe sighed and closed his eyes. Madam, is there money missing or have you had an affair? No to both, she said stiffly. But there's something in that steak, metaphorically, that's shaken him. I want to know what. I think someone's trying to expose him, or frighten him, or worse. Wolfe swiveled slightly, his version of leaning forward. You believe your husband is being threatened through culinary implication? I do. And the police? No, that's the point. Marvin doesn't want publicity. The Remnant lives on mystique. He'd rather shut it down than risk a scandal. Do you want it shut down? I asked. I want the truth. She looked at Wolfe. I want you to taste what I tasted. I've brought it. She opened her purse and took out a small sealed vacuum pack, transparent plastic, inside of which sat a single piece of cooked meat. No garnish, just a solitary reddish-brown rectangle like a sinister playing card. Wolfe didn't touch it. Fritz will analyze it, he said coolly. You'll leave it with Mr. Goodwin, and if the taste means nothing, then I shall consider your commission concluded. The absurdity will have proved itself. He paused. But if there is meaning in the steak, then someone has gone to considerable effort to make your husband remember something, or fear it. And you'll find out what, if it is findable." He pressed his fingertips together. "Mr. Goodwin will take your information. Your address, your husband's routine, and the guest list for the remnant if you can acquire it." She hesitated. "That's proprietary. Marvin guards it with his life." "Then perhaps that is what the steak was meant to warn him about," Wolfe murmured. I saw her off 10 minutes later, then returned to the office. Wolfe hadn't moved. "She's not crazy," I said. "Possibly not," he replied. "But this is a form of madness nonetheless. A man cowed by beef. Will you take the case?" "I already have. I want to know what kind of mind uses flavor to deliver a threat." He gestured toward the vacuum-sealed relic on the desk. "That, Archie, is a message composed with fire, blood, and salt. I should like to read it." And just like that we were off. Wolfe didn't speak for another half hour after Della Wexler left, which wasn't unusual. He sat in the big chair, fingers steepled, eyes closed, presumably parsing the metaphysics of seasoned meat. I didn't interrupt. Some men meditate, some pace. Wolfe marinates. The sealed steak package sat on the corner of his desk like evidence in a trial that hadn't started yet. I took it to the kitchen, where Fritz eyed it like a surgeon handed a scalpel wrapped in mystery. "You want me to taste this?" he asked, one eyebrow arched. "Not yet. Wolfe wants you to examine it first. Temperature, texture, seasoning, any signs it was doctored. He'll probably want you to recreate it later, so make notes." Fritz nodded solemnly. "You think it is poisoned?" "I think it's a message dressed as dinner. Maybe not deadly, but it sure got Marvin Wexler's attention. And Wolfe's." I left Fritz to his food forensics and returned to the office. Wolfe had opened his eyes and was thumbing through his address book. That meant one of two things: he was considering calling someone, or he was testing to see if I was paying attention. "Miss Wexler was too controlled," he said without looking up. "Either she's terrified or she's not telling the whole of it. Possibly both. She didn't strike me as the type to invent a steak conspiracy for fun," I said. "But she's definitely leaving something out. She kept reaching for her gloves every time she said Marvin's name." "Guilt or defensiveness?" Wolfe set the book down. "You'll go to the remnant. Reserve under a false name. Observe, taste, and identify anyone who might be provoking Mr. Wexler's panic. Reservations there are harder to get than sense out of Inspector Kramer," I pointed out. "Unless you want to pull a few strings or bribe a maître d'hôtel. You will manage. Use Miss Wexler's connection if necessary, but do not reveal her involvement. And Marvin, if he's hiding something, he'll be more interesting unguarded. Observe him, engage him if opportunity permits, but do not push. I want his instinctive reactions, not prepared lines." "Right," I said. "Go in, smile pretty, chew slowly, and spy." Wolfe ignored that. He was already reaching for the phone to summon Saul Panzer, which meant the gears were officially turning. The next morning I made the call to the remnant using a pseudonym I'd picked up years ago in Atlantic City, Charles Dana, magazine editor, mild dairy allergy. I hinted at a write-up in Gastronome Quarterly, name-dropped a couple of chefs I'd never met, and slipped enough cash through a messenger that I got a table for Friday night. It was Wednesday. Meanwhile, Saul came by for a quiet briefing in the front room. Wolfe kept it minimal. Standard tale on Marvin Wexler: watch for meetings, unusual movement, or hidden rendezvous. Saul asked no questions and left with the same unflappable expression he'd arrived with. I'd bet he'd find something within 12 hours. The man once tracked down a thief using a dry cleaner's receipt and a missing cufflink. That afternoon Fritz delivered his report. The steak, according to his analysis, had been cooked medium rare, sous vide, then seared, seasoned with cracked black pepper, flake salt, a hint of thyme, and something less traditional, mustard powder and clove, Fritz said, frowning. "Very subtle, and there's a faint metallic tang. Not blood, more like iron shavings, though none were visible." "No drug traces?" I asked. "None I could detect. It wasn't harmful, just oddly symbolic." When I relayed the findings to Wolfe, he grunted. "Iron and clove. The former suggests violence, the latter memory. Memory. It is a nostalgic spice, Archie. Smells of old trunks, buried things. Whoever prepared that steak was making a point about the past. Perhaps about what should have stayed buried. I was impressed despite myself. You think he was being blackmailed with taste alone. I think he was reminded. And someone knew that reminder would be enough. Thursday passed quietly. Saul phoned in at noon with an update. Marvin Wexler had gone to a private meeting the previous evening at an apartment in Soho. The tenant was a woman named Joni Lerner, 40-ish, former restaurant critic, now something between a freelance food consultant and a professional antagonist. No romantic signals, Saul said, but definite tension. Wexler left looking shaken. She hadn't followed him. That got Wolfe's attention. Find out her history with Wexler, he instructed, and whether she has a grudge to serve alongside mustard and cloves. Friday arrived and I dressed for dinner like a man preparing for an ambush. My table was for 8:30. I got there early to case the joint. The remnant was on the edge of Tribeca, tucked behind a plain red door that looked like it led to a boiler room. Inside it was low light, dark wood, no music, just murmurs, clinking glasses, and the hush of money being very well fed. The hostess, a tight-lipped woman in black, greeted me with a tone that suggested I was a tolerated inconvenience. She led me to a corner table. Good view of the room, semi-private. I settled in, ordered sparkling water and watched the show. The clientele was textbook hush-hush elite, studio execs, city council types. Two minor celebrities I recognized from talk shows. Marvin Wexler appeared 10 minutes later, wearing a charcoal suit and the expression of a man trying to seem casual while walking a high wire. He made the rounds, smiled, checked the kitchen door, adjusted his cufflinks. Classic case of nerves. I let the food come without comment. First course, a mousse of rabbit liver with elderflower foam. Fancy, sure, but nothing cryptic. Second, pan-seared sea bass on a smear of black garlic puree. Again artful but benign. Then came the steak. It arrived unadorned on a matte black plate. No garnish, no sauce, just a thick cut crusted gleaming. I cut in. Medium rare, beautifully done. First bite, salt, pepper, and something that nudged a nerve. A trace of clove, a whisper of iron. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I watched Marvin watch the room. And just before I swallowed I saw it happen. At a table near the bar, a man in a tan jacket lifted his fork, tasted his steak and stared down at it like it had just called him by name. His hand trembled. Marvin saw it. He froze. Then he turned away. I knew I'd seen something worth more than the meal, and Wolfe would want it plated immediately. When I got back to the brownstone just past 11, Wolfe was where I'd left him, parked in the big chair with a book in one hand and a globe of beer sweating on the side table. He didn't look up as I entered, but the way he turned the page with deliberate slowness was his way of saying, well. I waited until I'd poured myself a scotch and settled into the red chair. No need to rush when Wolfe was being theatrical. The remnant is every bit the cathedral to ego and appetite it's cracked up to be, I said. Dark, moody, reverent, not a menu in sight. They just bring you courses, and you nod like you're being knighted. Wolfe grunted. The steak, same as Fritz described, cooked with precision, salt, pepper, thyme, and a whisper of clove, just enough to brush up against memory. There was something metallic too, but subtle, like the ghost of a rusty nail. Wolfe's eyelids lifted a notch, and Wexler, nervous. He worked the room like a host with termites under the floorboards. Polite, practiced, but watching everyone like he expected a punch. Anyone of note. Most of the guests fit the profile, upscale, camera-shy, seasoned with secrets. But there was one man, late 50s, tan sport coat, thinning hair. He was seated near the bar. When his steak came, he reacted the same way Wexler did in Della's story. Froze up. Looked at the meat like it had called him a liar. Wolfe was silent. Then and Wexler noticed this. Like a hawk spotting a rat. He stiffened, turned away fast, then disappeared into the kitchen. That confirms it, Wolfe said softly. The steak is a cipher, a device. Someone is preparing it as a means of communication, one that bypasses language. Ingenious. Not exactly Morse code, I said, but yeah, it hit its target. Wolfe closed his book and leaned forward slightly. which in his language was equivalent to a man doing a somersault. You will identify the man in the tan coat. I want a name, history, and any connection to Wexler or the remnant. Start with the hostess. Did she seem the type to keep secrets or sell them? She seemed the type to eat them whole, I said. But I'll try. He nodded. Tomorrow morning. Meanwhile we shall hear from Saul. I expect he has found Joni Lerner's relevance. As if on cue, the phone rang. Wolfe motioned for me to take it. It was Saul. Precise as a watch and just as quiet. I've got background on Joni Lerner, he said. She reviewed Wexler's first restaurant back in the day, The Method. Gave it a brutal write-up that killed the place. 2 years later, she got sued for defamation by one of his investors. Case got dropped, but Wexler hasn't spoken to her since. Until now. Until 4 days ago. She moved to Soho 2 months back. Word is she's consulting for a new private dining startup, competitor to the remnant. She invited Wexler over. No one knows what they discussed, but he left looking like he'd been handed a shovel and a deadline. I thanked him, hung up, and relayed everything to Wolfe. He nodded slowly. So, the woman who destroyed his first venture has reappeared, possibly to threaten the second. With what? I asked. A bad review. Seems soft for a man who reacts to steak like it's a crime scene. Wolfe tapped his fingertips together. Not a review, a reminder. Suppose Miss Lerner knows something buried in that past venture, a financial impropriety, a betrayal, perhaps even a death, and has found a chef capable of reproducing that moment through flavor. Wait, I said. You think someone recreated a steak from Wexler's past, one tied to whatever he's hiding? Yes, precisely, the same recipe, down to the last spice. To most meaningless, to him unmistakable. A ghost, served medium rare. I sat back. It was wild, but it fit. All right, I said. So someone, maybe Lerner, hires a chef, replicates a steak from a time Wexler wants to forget, then serves it to him, and maybe to other people who were there, like tan coat guy. Exactly, Wolfe said. And one of them will panic, or confess, or retaliate. He let that hang in the air like steam from a stock pot. Then he looked at me. Tomorrow you'll find the man in the tan coat. Get his name. I want him in this office by Saturday evening. Understood. Also, Wolfe added, ask Miss Wexler for a guest list from the night she tasted her husband's steak. I want to know who else was being served memories. The next morning, I was back at the remnant, this time under the pretense of returning a forgotten cufflink. The hostess didn't look pleased to see me, but money can make even the tightest lips loosen a little. I gave her $50 for her trouble, and asked who the man in the tan jacket was. Her eyes darted, then settled. Dr. Ray Hostin. He's a surgeon, comes in every other Friday, never brings a guest, quiet, tips well, friend of Marvin's. I don't know, they never sit together, but he was one of the founding members when we launched. Did he ever dine at the Method? She blinked. You know about the Method? Just curious. She hesitated. Yes, all of them did. The original members of the remnant were from Marvin's old clientele, so the ghosts had gathered again. I thanked her, left another tip, and made a mental note to track down Hostin's office. That evening, Della Wexler returned my call. She sounded more clipped than before. I can't get you the guest list, Mr. Goodwin, she said. Marvin keeps those private, locked away. Then maybe tell me who was there the night you had that steak. She paused. 3 couples, 1 publisher, 1 former chef, 1 woman who used to work with Marvin's investor group. That's all I can recall. Any names? No. But if you find out what's going on, I want to know. You'll know, I said. So will Wolfe. Back at the brownstone, I handed over everything. Wolfe nodded once and rang Fritz to begin preparing a new steak. Same style, same seasoning. You think the dish is a confession? I asked. No, Wolfe murmured. It is a reminder, and reminders are more dangerous. They summon guilt, and guilt, Archie, is a spice sharper than clove. He turned his head slightly toward the kitchen. Sooner or later, someone is going to choke on it. The next morning, I got up early, skipped breakfast,
"Don't tell Fritz," and made my way to Dr. Ray Hoston's office on East 66th, a limestone-fronted building that whispered money but not too loudly. His receptionist, a glossy brunette named Tina, informed me in the tone of someone denying parole that Dr. Hoston was booked through next week and wasn't seeing visitors, especially ones without an appointment. I gave her my best smile and passed her a business card with one of my lesser-used aliases, Gordon R. Slate, health writer, New York View. I told her I wasn't there for surgery, just a little background research on physicians with refined culinary taste for an upcoming piece on the hidden foodies of medicine. She glanced at the card, then at me, and after a long moment of professional doubt, got up and disappeared behind a frosted glass door. 5 minutes later, she returned with a sigh. "He'll give you 10 minutes. Don't expect coffee, Dr. Hoston's office was wood-paneled and orderly, with awards on one wall and a single oil painting of a surgical theater on the other. He was about 60, lean, silver hair clipped close, and a pair of surgical hands that looked like they'd never picked up a check, let alone a carving knife. "I don't normally indulge food writers," he said, motioning me to sit. "But you caught me in a generous mood. Appreciated." "I'll keep it short," I said, settling into the leather chair. "I'm researching physicians with gourmet leanings. I noticed your name on the guest registry at the Remnant, not just recently back in the Method days." His eyes flickered. "That was a long time ago." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm interested in how your taste evolved. Last Friday, for instance, you had the steak, correct?" He nodded slowly, guarded. "It was fine, as always. Nothing stand out to you? Strange flavor, unusual seasoning?" He hesitated. "No, why?" "Some patrons described it as memorable, specifically, that it tasted identical to a steak served years ago at the Method. Curious, right?" He stood up suddenly and moved behind his desk. "Mr. Slate, I have patience. I didn't agree to culinary psychology." I didn't move. "You recognized it, didn't you?" Silence. "Dr. Hoston, I don't care if it triggered an allergy or an affair, but someone wants you to remember it. Same recipe, same moment, same guilt." His eyes narrowed. "Get out, of course. One last thing. Was Joni Lerner at the Method that night?" That got me a pause. Just a flicker. "She wrote about it. That's all I know." I left before he called security, but not before seeing enough in his face to confirm Wolfe's theory. The man had tasted more than just meat. He'd tasted memory, and it had turned his stomach. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was midway through his orchids. I gave him the update while he scowled at a stanhopea refusing to bloom. "So," I concluded, "Hoston clammed up the moment I mentioned the Method, and he nearly swallowed his tongue when I brought up Joni Lerner." "He was there," Wolfe said flatly, "and the steak signified something he cannot admit, something bad enough to scare him silent." "Good. Fear is useful. Now we begin the squeeze." Wolfe rang Sol and gave him marching orders. "Dig into the guest list from the Method's final nights, especially the evening of its infamous health code violation, the one that shuttered it. Cross-reference that with known associates of Joni Lerner and any of the founding members of the Remnant." "You think the steak was from that night?" I asked, after he hung up. "Yes, that night was pivotal. The Method was abruptly closed, Lerner vanished from food criticism, and Wexler disappeared for nearly a year. Something happened, Archie, something more than a bad review. That afternoon, while Fritz recreated the steak under Wolfe's instruction, same temperature, seasoning, sear, I paid a visit to an old contact of mine at the health department archives, a guy named Dominic, who owed me a favor from a time involving an illegal foie gras shipment and a bribed city inspector. Dominic pulled the inspection file for the Method's closure. I skimmed it fast. The official reason: unsanitary kitchen conditions, rodent evidence, potential contamination. But there were no photos, no fines, no follow-up, just a closed case. "Anything off record?" I asked him. Dominic checked over his shoulder, then tapped the file. "The inspector who filed this, Archie Goodwin. He quit the next week, Early retirement, no pension, no explanation. Where is he now? Dominic shrugged. Disappeared. Some say he moved out west. Some say he got paid to stay gone. That was the last piece of the puzzle Wolfe needed to start assembling the edges. That evening, I returned to the brownstone to find the dining room table set for 3, rare, since Wolfe considered extra mouths a logistical inconvenience. Fritz had laid out bread, wine and the steak, cooked to spec. Wolfe called me and Saul in at precisely 7 p.m. Saul had arrived with a slim folder of findings. 5 guests dined at the Method the night it closed, Saul reported. Wexler, Hostin, a financier named Kenneth Greer, a chef named Simone Varnier, and Joni Lerner. They were the only patrons. It was a private meal. And the inspector, Wolfe asked, Archie Goodwin. No record of inspection that night, just a violation filed the next morning. The entire thing was buried. Simone Varnier, I asked. Where is she now? Living in Brooklyn, Saul said. Out of the business, refuses interviews, apparently left the culinary world after the Method folded. Interview her, Wolfe said, carefully. Then he turned to the steak.
We all tasted it. Fritz had outdone himself. It was perfect, succulent, savory, and spiced with unease. The clove lingered just long enough to raise questions. The iron was there, faint but insistent. This, Wolfe said slowly, was the dish served on the night the Method died. Not merely a meal. A warning. A secret encoded in salt and fire, and someone, Lerner perhaps, has found the recipe again. Now they are serving it cold, one guest at a time. And what happened that night? I asked. Wolfe looked at me. That, Archie, is what we are about to find out, and if we do not uncover it soon, someone else will be served something much worse than a guilty steak. Saturday morning opened with rain. Not the poetic kind, but the slick, insistent drizzle that turns New York into a chore. I got back from a coffee run soaked halfway to the ribs and handed Wolfe his paper towel-wrapped Danish like a penitent altar boy. He didn't thank me. Wolfe doesn't believe in gratitude before noon. Instead, he grunted and gestured toward his desk, where a fresh manila folder lay waiting, Saul's latest delivery. Inside were surveillance notes, background sketches, and a photocopy of a letter Wolfe had clearly spent some time pondering. It was typed, no signature, no return address, but the postmark was from Brooklyn, and the letter was addressed to Marvin Wexler. Wolfe handed it to me without ceremony. I read aloud, "You tried to bury it with truffle oil and expense accounts, but some meals don't digest. Do you remember the taste of that night? Because I do, and so will the others. Serve them the steak again, let them remember, or I will." I let out a low whistle. That's not blackmail, that's culinary revenge poetry. Wolfe closed his eyes and nodded. Joni Lerner, almost certainly. The prose is performative. She's writing for an audience. Marvin perhaps, but also herself. She wants something more than money, I said. Vindication, or guilt, Wolfe replied. It may be that she was not merely a critic that night, but a witness, perhaps to an act that spoiled more than the broth. Just then Fritz appeared in the doorway. Miss Simone Varnier is here. Wolfe opened his eyes. Show her in. Simone Varnier looked like someone who'd once been famous in a world most people didn't know existed. She had the kind of weathered elegance that said she'd spent years perfecting things other people ate in 30 seconds. Mid-50s, salt and pepper bob, chef's hands with no polish. She wore a gray raincoat like armor, and kept one hand in her pocket like she was gripping a knife. I don't talk about the Method, she said, as soon as she sat down. Madam, Wolfe said, you are not being asked to. You are being asked to tell me about a night when 5 people dined on a steak that has returned to haunt them. Her lips thinned. So it's begun again. That got my attention. You've heard. I received one too, she said. A letter. Same style. Same message. I burned it. Wolfe inclined his head. You cooked the steak that night. I did. Marvin asked for something memorable. He said it had to impress and silence at once. I served a fillet with clove, mustard powder, and a trace of iron, an old Corsican seasoning, symbolic. A flavor meant to suggest danger and permanence. And the others? Wolfe asked. They ate it. They praised it, except for Joni. She excused herself halfway through. Why? I don't know, she said flatly. But I saw her later arguing with Archie Goodwin in the alley behind the restaurant. I was taking out the compost. Wolfe's eyes glinted. What were they arguing about? She was shouting. Something about him being late, about timing, and about not doing what he said he would. Could she have been involved in the closure? Simone nodded. I think she arranged it. She knew something, or saw something, or maybe just wanted revenge. But when the kitchen closed the next morning, Marvin didn't even fight it. He just paid me off and vanished. The others scattered. You've not spoken to any of them since? Not once. And the steak? Wolfe asked. You still remember the recipe? I never forgot, she said quietly. But I've never cooked it again. Until now. She stood. If someone's using that flavor again, it's not a coincidence. It's a message. From someone who wants them to squirm. And they should. Wolfe didn't try to stop her. She left with the quiet force of someone who had carried too much and dropped it all at once. After she'd gone, I looked at Wolfe. So it's official. The steak was symbolic, a culinary calling card. More than that, Wolfe said. It was a reenactment. Of what? Of betrayal. Possibly of collusion. Perhaps even of a death. The question is, who did what, and why does Lerner want them to relive it now? Before I could respond, the phone rang. I answered. It was Saul. Got something big, he said. I found Archie Goodwin. You what? He's living in Maine under the name Alan Groves. I confirmed it through his brother. Got an address, but here's the kicker. He's dying. Stage 4 pancreatic. He's got less than a month. I relayed the news to Wolfe, who sat up straighter in his chair than I'd seen in days. Call him, Wolfe said. Now. It took a few tries, but eventually I got Goodwin on the line. His voice was low, cracked, but lucid. I wondered when someone would come calling, he said after I introduced myself. Mr. Goodwin, we're looking into what happened the night the method closed. We believe someone is using that night to stir up old ghosts. He chuckled, a dry rattle. They never really left, did they? I tried to forget. Thought maybe if I disappeared, it would go quiet. What happened that night? I got paid not to file the real report, he said simply. I found something in the basement, something that shouldn't have been there. A locked cabinet. When I pried it open, documents, cash, and something worse. Define worse, I said. A small container, he rasped. Medical grade, labeled for research use only. Illegal without license. It had a biohazard sticker, and Wexler knew what it was. You confronted him? No. Joni Lerner did. She saw me find it. She said she'd been waiting. She was baiting him, trying to get him to slip. But I think he saw her first. She vanished that night. Then the next day I filed a bogus health report, and left town with hush money. I swallowed. And the others? They were all in on it, I think. Or at least they benefited. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. What does Lerner want now? She wants justice, or revenge. Maybe both. He hung up before I could ask more. Back in the office, Wolfe sat in silence as I gave the full account. So I concluded. Joni Lerner baited a trap 10 years ago. Wexler dodged it. Now she's resetting the bait. Only this time she's serving it on a plate. Wolfe opened his eyes. Then we must invite the guests to dinner. You want them all here? Yes. Every surviving diner from that night, including Marvin Wexler, including Simone, including Hostin. They must be seated together. The taste of secrets must be shared once more. And you'll serve them the steak? No, he said. Fritz will, and I will serve the reckoning. It took some doing to line up the guests for Wolfe's little soiree, not because they were unavailable, but because convincing 4 people to step into the same room where their collective past was about to be flambéed required the finesse of a diplomat and the persistence of a bounty hunter. Dr. Ray Hostin was the first to fold. He tried protesting again, citing professional obligations and patient care. But I reminded him that Wolfe could just as easily summon him in the presence of a district attorney, if he preferred things more formal. That got him moving. Simone Varnia didn't blink. If this ends it, she said simply, I'll come. Marvin Wexler took more convincing.
He didn't answer my first 3 calls, and when he finally did, his voice was hoarse and defensive. "What does Wolfe want from me?" "Closure," I said, "and maybe redemption." There was a long silence. "I'll come," he said, finally, "but only if Della isn't involved. She knows nothing of what happened." "Understood." Della had called me twice since her last visit, voice clipped and cautious, asking if I'd made progress. I told her yes, but not yet enough to explain. She didn't like that, but she didn't push. Some instincts don't need explaining. We set the gathering for Sunday night. Wolfe gave strict instructions. The dining room would serve as the stage, not the office. The table would be laid precisely as it had been at the Method 10 years earlier, down to the folded linen napkins and the dimmed amber lights. Fritz, in a rare departure from his own aesthetic scruples, agreed to recreate the steak once more. Wolfe called it a culinary reenactment, like a theater piece in which flavor substituted for dialogue. At 7 o'clock sharp the guests arrived. Simone came alone, a calm presence in a black blouse and tailored slacks, her silver-streaked hair tucked back like she'd come not to cook, but to witness. Hostin was nervous, he always was, and avoided eye contact like it might draw fire. Wexler came last, as if stalling would delay the inevitable. He wore a navy suit and a forced smile, his eyes darting like he was expecting Lerner to leap from behind a curtain. They were seated in silence. Wolfe, from his chair near the archway, didn't rise but inclined his head slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you are here because 10 years ago, you shared a meal meant to silence. It did not. It merely delayed reckoning." Wexler bristled. "I don't know what this is." "You do," Wolfe interrupted. "You recognize the steak, you recognize the flavor, and you know precisely why someone is using it now." Fritz entered then, wordless, bearing silver platters. Each guest was served the recreated fillet, medium rare, seared crust, seasoned just so. No side dishes, no bread, no wine, just the steak. No one touched it at first. Then Simone reached for her knife, sliced a bite, and chewed slowly. She nodded once, a curt gesture of recognition. Hostin followed. He swallowed and flinched. Wexler didn't touch his plate. "You remember it," Wolfe said softly. "The night the Method closed, the steak served at the final supper, and what followed." Wexler looked at him. "You're fishing." "I have already caught the fish," Wolfe said. "What I seek now is the source of the poison." He turned to Simone. "You prepared this dish." "At Wexler's request." She nodded. "He told me to make something unforgettable." "You did." And Lerner understood it for what it was, a symbol of complicity, of silence, perhaps even of a crime. Wexler snapped. "There was no crime." "No." Wolfe's voice sharpened. "Then tell us about the container in the basement." Hostin paled. Simone blinked. Wexler closed his eyes. "Medical grade," Wolfe went on. "Labeled for research use only. Stored illegally. Hidden from regulators. Discovered by an inspector who was paid to disappear. And seen possibly by Lerner, who has spent a decade preparing your punishment." Hostin pushed his plate away. "I didn't know what was in it." "But you knew it was there," Wolfe said. "You said nothing." Simone's voice was cold. "Neither did I." Wexler's voice cracked. "It wasn't supposed to be discovered." Wolfe leaned back. "Then perhaps you'll explain what was in that container, Mr. Wexler, and why you paid to keep it quiet." Silence. Then Wexler said, "It was an experimental enzyme, meant for molecular gastronomy, a synthetic compound, still unapproved. I obtained it through an investor, illegally. I used it in several dishes to enhance texture. It was harmless, but unlicensed," Wolfe said, "and dangerous in the wrong hands." "Yes, that's why it was hidden. Lerner saw it, and threatened to expose me. I begged her to wait. She said she would. Then Garvin found it, and the next day, the Method was finished. And you let it be," Wolfe said. "You let it die quietly, buried the truth, and started again, until someone remembered, until the taste returned." Wexler buried his face in his hands. Wolfe's voice dropped. "Lerner has been sending you reminders, one by one, each of you who dined that night, each of you who said nothing. The steak is her message, her mirror, and now it has reflected what you all chose not to see." No one spoke. Then Simone said, "So what now?" Wolfe's eyes were half-lidded. "She wants a reckoning. I propose you give it to her." "How?" Hostin rasped. "You publish the truth," Wolfe said. "A collective statement. What you saw, what you did not say. You return to the public the thing you tried to forget. And if we don't," Wolfe looked at Wexler, "then I give the statement to the press, with Archie Garvin's affidavit." Wexler lifted his head. His face was gray. "Would that satisfy her?" "It might," Wolfe said. "But even if it doesn't, it is the correct thing to do. You owe that to the guests you served, and to yourselves." Silence again. Then Hostin nodded. Slowly, reluctantly, Simone followed. Wexler said nothing, but he didn't object. That was enough. The guests were dismissed, one by one, and the house grew quiet. Back in the office, I poured 2 drinks and handed one to Wolfe. "You think she'll accept it?" I asked. Wolfe sipped. "She doesn't seek punishment. She seeks acknowledgement, memory unburied. And if she wants more, then she will find she's already had her revenge." He raised his glass toward the kitchen. "The steak was never about flavor. It was about conscience. And that, Archie, always leaves an aftertaste." The next morning, Wolfe did something so rare it nearly dislocated my eyebrows. He rose from bed a full 20 minutes earlier than usual. No orchid tending, no breakfast deliberations. He was in his chair in the office, robe belted, eyes sharp, and an open notebook in front of him by 8 o'clock. That meant one thing: he was waiting for the final move. I brought in the mail, thin, and a copy of the Gazette. There on page 9 was a short unsigned piece that read like the beginning of a long overdue confession. No names, but unmistakable references: an unnamed chef, a private supper, experimental enzymes, regulatory violations, and a culinary evening now acknowledged as a moral failure. I handed it to Wolfe without a word. He skimmed it, grunted softly, and set it aside. "They have made the statement," he said, "as required." I sat down. Wexler must have gotten the message, though I bet a medium porterhouse he didn't write that piece himself. "No," Wolfe said. "It has Simone's rhythm. She was the only one among them who saw that night for what it was. The others merely fled it." "You think it'll be enough for Lerner?" "I think," Wolfe said, "we are about to find out." He wasn't wrong. The phone rang before the clock struck 9. I picked it up. "She'll see you," Saul's voice said. "Joni Lerner. I contacted her with the summary of your gathering. She agreed to speak to you alone." "Me?" "She doesn't want Wolfe. Says she wants to look someone in the eye." "She has my sympathies," I muttered, but I took the address. A brownstone in Park Slope, 4th floor, no elevator. Naturally, she greeted me at the door in a gray sweater and dark jeans, her hair up, no makeup. She didn't smile, just opened the door and pointed toward a narrow sitting room filled with books, soft light, and one impressive array of spices on a shelf. "So," she said, once I was seated. "Did they flinch?" "They did more than flinch," I said. "They remembered, and they confessed." "To whom?" "To the press." Vaguely. Wolfe made sure of it. She raised an eyebrow. "But not to the public." "They will," I said. It started. "The door's open." She looked at me. "That night, do you know what it meant to me?" I shook my head. I came to the method not as a critic, but as a journalist. I'd heard rumors about Wexler's supplier, about that compound. I was going to catch him, expose it, but I was sloppy. He saw me talking to Garvin. He connected the dots. "You didn't publish." "No, because I failed. Because I was scared. Because Garvin disappeared, and I thought I was next." She stared at the shelf. "I left the business, but I never forgot that flavor. It was the taste of cowardice. And now they know I didn't forget," she said. "They know I remember. That's enough." I looked at her. "You sure? This could still be public. Names, headlines." She was quiet a long time. Then she said, "No, the fear was theirs. That's the punishment." We sat in silence. Then she asked, "Does Wolfe eat the steak?" I laughed. "Not in this lifetime." She smiled, brief, real, and stood. The meeting was over. I reported everything back that afternoon. Wolfe listened, impassive, then murmured, "So she accepts justice." not through retribution, but through fear. Not bad for a food critic. She was never just that, he said. She was a sentinel, waiting for the others to come clean. And now, we closed the book, which we did. 3 days passed. The Gazette ran a follow-up, an op-ed by Simone Varnier on ethics in the culinary world. Houston declined comment. Wexler issued a press release on the evolution of culinary accountability. It read like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. Then came the unexpected. On Thursday, Della Wexler appeared again at our door. She looked different, not frazzled this time, composed, focused. She declined tea, which I noted, then took the red chair and looked Wolfe dead in the eye. "I know now," she said. Wolfe didn't blink. "Indeed, he told me, after your gathering, he couldn't sleep, said he owed me the truth. You deserved it." "Yes," she said. "He's dismantling the remnant, quietly, says he doesn't deserve it anymore." I glanced at Wolfe. He was stone. "Did he say why?" I asked. Della answered, "Because he poisoned something. Not people, something deeper. Trust, purpose." Wolfe finally spoke. "And you?" "I'm leaving," she said, not in anger, just done. "There are some meals you can't finish." She stood. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. You didn't just solve something, you restored something else." Wolfe inclined his head. "Madam." After she left, I looked at him. "You know you didn't get paid for this one." He closed his eyes. "No, but I got peace, and a promise that flavor for once was used to illuminate, not to conceal." I nodded. "That's almost sentimental." He opened one eye. "Phooey, Fritz lunch." It was just past 1 o'clock when Fritz brought in lunch: veal kidneys with a mustard cream sauce, braised endives, and warm brioche rolls that steamed when broken. Wolfe attacked the food like a man, renewing his lease on life, which in his case meant scowling thoughtfully at each bite before consuming it with studied reverence. I took mine at the desk with a sandwich from a nearby deli that tasted like it had been made by someone holding a grudge. We hadn't spoken much since Della Wexler's departure. There was nothing urgent left to say. The storm had passed, the air was clearing, and Wolfe, like a fat cat in the sun, was content to digest both facts and food. Still, I had one question I couldn't shake. "So," I said, peeling the wax paper from my sandwich, "was it really all about the steak? Or was that just Lerner's way of getting back in the game?" Wolfe dabbed at his mouth. "You mistake the symbol for the instrument. The steak was not the point. It was the handle of the blade, not the blade itself." "Then what was?" "Memory," he said, "preserved, reheated, and served at the exact temperature needed to induce discomfort. Lerner didn't seek justice through courts or headlines. She weaponized familiarity. And Wexler, a man who buried the truth beneath char and seasoning. But taste," Wolfe said, pushing away his plate, "is immune to deception. One cannot forget what the tongue remembers." I nodded, not just because it made sense but because, frankly, it was hard to argue with a man who could turn a mustard sauce into a moral philosophy. We spent the rest of the afternoon in silence, interrupted only by a call from Saul, who confirmed that Garvin had passed away quietly the night before. No family, no statement, just a handwritten note left behind that read, "I kept the silence, let someone else speak now." Wolfe accepted this news with a slight nod. "Then the last of the original witnesses is gone. That leave you satisfied?" I asked. "No," he said, "but it closes the circle, and that, Archie, has value." As dusk rolled in, I stepped out for a walk, needing air that didn't taste of old secrets. The city moved on as if no one had ever served guilt on a plate. Taxis honked, lights blinked, couples argued about dinner. Humanity, I figured, has a way of dodging the big moments. It's the small ones that stick. When I got back to the brownstone, Fritz had prepared a light supper: white asparagus with poached egg and hazelnut vinaigrette. Wolfe declined. He said he needed only tea. That was the tell. He'd had his feast. The rest was digestion. Later that night, I went into the office to tidy up and found Wolfe alone in the dark, the last of the evening sun streaking the room amber. He didn't look up. "You intend to document this, I presume?" "Already started," I said. "Working title, The steak that tasted of secrets. Got a nice noir ring to it. Overwrought, he muttered. Sure, but marketable. He allowed a grudging grunt. Then he said, do not forget to note that no arrests were made, and no charges filed. I hadn't, I said. But the moral ledger got balanced, at least a little. An illusion, Wolfe said, but a necessary one. I poured myself a drink, and leaned against the window. You ever wonder, I asked, if the rest of the world works like this, tasting things they don't understand until it's too late? Wolfe opened his eyes. Constantly. That is why I eat here, I chuckled. Spoken like a man with his own fortress. He didn't respond, just closed his eyes again. We let the quiet settle. Then Wolfe said, Lerner was clever. She understood that exposure is not always the goal. Sometimes memory must linger, not to punish, but to prevent. And if they forget again, they won't, he said. They've tasted themselves. That is more effective than shame. I let that hang there. Then I turned out the office light, and left him to the evening.
The next morning the brownstone returned to its usual routine: orchids, eggs, and the mail arranged precisely on the corner of Wolfe's desk. No visitors, no steak, just the echo of one. There was no fanfare, no thank you note from Wexler, no follow-up article. Lerner disappeared back into the quiet corners of her consulting work. Simone Varnier reopened a small culinary school in Queens. Hostin returned to surgery with a renewed obsession for sterilization. And Wexler, well, the remnant went dark within 2 weeks. Rumor had it he was moving to Lisbon to write a book on wine. Wolfe didn't care. Once the pieces had been put back on the board and the pawns accounted for, the game for him was over. We never spoke of the steak again. But sometimes when Fritz serves beef with an unusual spice, or when the clove in a dish hits just a little too sharp, I see Wolfe pause briefly, not in fear, not in regret, but in recollection. And I know that for all his logic and order there are flavors he will never request again. Not because they offend the palate, but because they remind him that even a genius can't always untaste the truth. Monday brought with it a fresh coat of spring sun, the kind that made Manhattan seem less like a conspiracy and more like a halfway tolerable place to live. At 9 o'clock, Fritz served Wolfe a breakfast of soft-boiled eggs, buttered rye toast, and coffee laced with precise scorn for over-roasted beans. I sat across from him with the paper and a pastry that had seen better centuries. By now the story of the remnant's quiet shutdown had faded from the gossip pages and been replaced by headlines about a city council scandal and a missing racehorse in Yonkers. As far as the world was concerned, Marvin Wexler had simply walked off the stage of fine dining with no curtain call. But I had a feeling the final act hadn't quite finished. Wolfe was halfway through his second egg when the doorbell rang. I checked the clock too early for a delivery, too late for an honest mistake. I answered expecting a courier or someone with the wrong address. Instead I found Saul Panzer standing on the stoop with a sealed envelope in his hand and an expression that said this was not an ordinary Monday. He stepped inside, handed me the envelope and said only, "She wanted this delivered to Wolfe. Personally." No explanation. I nodded, took it, and led him into the office. Wolfe was already seated, napkin folded on his plate, coffee cup abandoned. He looked at the envelope. "From whom?" "Joni Lerner," Saul said. Wolfe took it without comment and sliced it open with his letter opener, a piece of ivory he liked more than most people. Inside was a single page, typed. No salutation, no signature. "Mr. Wolfe. There is one detail I withheld, not out of fear, but because I needed to see what the others would do when left to their own shame. The enzyme Wexler hid that night. He told everyone it was experimental, for gastronomy. It wasn't. I had it tested a month ago, through a contact. It was never intended for food. It was a pharmaceutical, an illegal neurological stimulant still in early clinical trials, highly addictive, and potentially lethal in prolonged doses. They didn't just lie to avoid scandal. They served it, repeatedly, to guests, including me. I experienced symptoms for weeks. Hallucinations, vertigo, sensory disruption. I didn't understand at the time. I thought I was losing my mind. Now I know better. The crime wasn't silence, it was endangerment. I leave that knowledge with you. Wolfe finished reading, set the page down and closed his eyes. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in a kind of weary resignation I'd only seen a few times before. Once when a client lied about a dead child. Another time after someone poisoned Fritz's butter. Saul didn't speak, neither did I. Finally, Wolfe said, "What do we know about the compound?" Saul replied, "I can confirm the research lab. It's used in advanced cognitive therapy trials, never approved for food or general consumption. High absorption rates, known to create sensory distortion and euphoria." Wexler had a connection through an investor, Kenneth Greer, the financier from that night. Wolfe murmured. Greer disappeared overseas 2 years ago, never charged, never returned. And the others? Wolfe asked. Simone didn't know. Hostin claims he didn't either, but he administered a taste test for Wexler at least twice. He could have suspected. Could. Wolfe repeated softly. That is the word beneath every betrayal. I asked, "What do we do with this?" Wolfe looked at me. "What would you do? Tell the press, and ruin 4 reputations. Destroy the life of a woman who finally found peace." Wolfe said, "This is not murder in the street, Archie. It is an old war between guilt and denial. She gave it to you for a reason." "Yes," he said, "to see what I would do." He stood, another rarity, and paced to the window, watching the street like it had lied to him. "She is right," Wolfe said. "This was not merely about ethics, it was harm, measured, masked, and served on porcelain." I said nothing. The air was thick with a different kind of weight. Then Wolfe turned. "Saul, I want a report on anyone who consumed the compound at the Method. Confidential guests, reviewers, investors. I want to know if there were other symptoms, health complications, lawsuits, anything." Saul nodded and left without another word. Wolfe sat back down and poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, which he didn't touch. After a moment I said, "You're going to act on this?" "Yes, even though Lerner doesn't ask you to." "She already has," Wolfe said. "She gave me the truth. She no longer wants vengeance. She wants to know someone else will carry it forward." "What does that mean?" "It means," Wolfe said, "that morality is not about action. It is about stewardship." The room was quiet. Outside, the street traffic hissed in rhythm with the rain starting up again. I knew then that Wolfe wouldn't let the knowledge vanish, not with his name, not with his standards. Whether it took days or years, he would dig, file, and eventually present a case so airtight even time couldn't breathe through it. But for now he would sit, think, and if Fritz was lucky, resume his eggs. The file stayed on his desk for the rest of the week, untouched, but not unread. And every morning, Wolfe stared at it before opening his mail, as if reminding himself that even the finest palate can be fooled, if it chooses to forget what guilt tastes like. By Thursday afternoon, the file Lerner had sent still hadn't moved from Wolfe's desk, and neither had Wolfe. He stared at it between meals like it was a rare orchid blooming out of season, part curiosity, part dread. I offered to file it away twice. Both times I got a curt shake of the head. We were in a state of moral marination. Wolfe was brooding, not in the dramatic, cape-flapping sense, but in that dense internal way of his, the way he brooded over logical knots or truffles that weren't properly stored. He hadn't yet decided whether to act, and when Nero Wolfe hasn't made up his mind, the rest of us orbit like moons around a very heavy, very silent planet. It was around 4 o'clock when the buzzer rang. Unexpected guests at that hour were like bad pennies. They usually came with complications. I went down to check. To my surprise, it was Inspector Kramer. He stood in the vestibule with his usual trench coat, and the air of a man who'd just had to explain the law to someone who thought Yelp reviews outranked court orders. He was holding a folded copy of the Gazette. "I know he hates unannounced visits," Kramer said, "but I figured since he hasn't stuck his nose in anyone else's business this week, maybe he was overdue." "Come on in," I said. "We've got hot tea." In heavy silence, he followed me up and into the office. Wolfe didn't rise. He never did, but he looked up and gave Kramer a single slow nod. "Inspector Wolfe," Kramer grunted, lowering himself into the red chair like it owed him back rent. "I'm here about Wexler." Wolfe's fingers steepled. "Ah." Kramer held up the paper. This anonymous piece you had your fingerprints all over. You know what it's doing at one police plaza. I can imagine. It's raising eyebrows, Kramer said. And questions. Health department violations. Unlicensed substances. Past exposure to an illegal compound. You open that box, Wolfe. You better be ready for what crawls out. I didn't open it, Wolfe said. Lerner did. I merely insisted that those who dined that night taste their history. And now there's talk of a federal inquiry. So be it. Kramer leaned forward. You sitting on anything else? Something that could push this into criminal charges? Wolfe didn't blink. That depends on your appetite for ambiguity. Try me. Wolfe inclined his head toward me. I retrieved Lerner's letter from the desk and handed it over. Kramer read it in silence. His lips moved slightly as he parsed the language. When he finished, he sat back. Well, hell. Indeed, Wolfe said. Who else has seen this? No one, Wolfe said. Not even the press. You could have gone public. I still might, Wolfe replied. But I wished to see what those involved would do with the knowledge of their complicity. So far they've retreated into silence and self-preservation. That suggests they have something to lose, or something to hide, Kramer muttered. He folded the letter carefully. If this stimulant was administered without knowledge, it's a civil suit. If it was deliberate, that's a felony. Wolfe's voice was quiet. The evidence has long since dissipated. No samples remain. The supplier has fled. The victims have either moved on or remained unaware. Only one person documented symptoms, and she declines prosecution. Kramer stared at him. So we do nothing? No, Wolfe said. We watch, closely. Wexler has retreated, but his past may yet resurface, and Lerner's conscience is not the only one awakening. Kramer stood slowly. This isn't over. I rather hope not, Wolfe said. The worst secrets are those buried prematurely. Let them ferment. Truth, like wine, improves when uncorked carefully. Kramer turned to go, then paused. You're getting poetic in your old age. Wolfe grunted. Nonsense. I am simply hungry. After the door closed behind him, I poured Wolfe a fresh glass of beer and sat across from him. So I said, you're letting it ride. For now, you're trusting the truth to work on them from the inside. Wolfe looked at me over the rim of his glass. It is the only place truth has ever worked. I leaned back. You know, if this were a movie, we'd end with a dramatic arrest and a steak sizzling on the grill. This is not a movie, Wolfe said. And steak should never sizzle. It should whisper. I laughed and he didn't stop me. The days that followed were quiet. Wexler released no more statements. Hostin retreated from the public eye. Simone announced a new seminar on ethics in cuisine at a small culinary institute, which was as much a confession as a resume item. Lerner sent no further letters, and Wolfe, he didn't file the envelope away. He left it on his desk, a thin reminder of where morality lives, not in headlines, not in handcuffs, but in memory. One morning, over breakfast he said, you may document it, Archie, fully, no pseudonyms. I looked up. Everything? Yes, Wolfe said. If people forget what guilt tastes like, they may serve it again. I would rather they remember, so I wrote it, every bite of it, and when I was done Wolfe read it once, said, acceptable, and returned to his eggs. We never received another case involving cuisine, not quite like that, but once, several months later, a note arrived by mail, no name, just 4 words on a blank card. I didn't forget. J. Wolfe read it, said nothing, and slipped it into the drawer where he kept old recipes and unopened invitations. He didn't comment, but that night he asked Fritz to prepare chicken instead of beef. Just once, just that once, and nothing flavored with clove. The spring sun was breaking through the clouds by the time I closed the file. 12,000 words of observation, deduction, stake and subtle vengeance. Wolfe hadn't spoken for the better part of an hour. He sat in his chair, eyes half closed, lips pursed as if pondering a flavor that had just turned bitter. I slid the typescript across the desk toward him. That's the last of it, I said. Unless someone decides to confess mid-brunch. He grunted without opening his eyes. No one will. Confession requires courage. What they've had is a taste of consequence. Still, I said, it played out the way you like it.
No arrests, no public spectacle, just private reckoning and precise verbal dismantling. It is the only reckoning worth achieving, he murmured. That which restores the balance without toppling the structure. I nodded. And Lerner, she acted with restraint, he said. Better than some might have. She served the truth. Seasoned, yes, but not charred. Enough to awaken memory, not destroy. I stood and stretched, watching the sunlight crawl across the rug. Outside, the city was already moving to the next scandal, the next sensation. Inside the brownstone, it was calm, not silence, never that, not with the street below and Fritz preparing dinner, but stillness, earned. You think Wexler's done? I asked. Gone for good? No, Wolfe said, finally lifting his eyes. Men like him rarely disappear entirely. He will re-emerge. A different name, a different kitchen, a different lie. But he will be more careful now. He has tasted fear. And Lerner, she has done what few can. She turned pain into warning, regret into instruction. That is more difficult than revenge. I leaned against the window frame, arms folded. You know you never charged her a dime. She did not require a detective, Wolfe said. She required a stage, and you gave it to her. I offered a table, he said. She brought the fire. We were quiet for a beat. Then Wolfe added, almost absently, and you, Archie. Yeah, be certain your account doesn't stray into melodrama. Please. I haven't even described your beer in poetic terms. He grunted. Good. There was a knock at the door. Fritz's light, unmistakable rhythm. Dinner, Wolfe said, as if announcing a verdict. We stood, the mystery behind us like a plate scraped clean. No parades, no headlines, just another secret laid bare and quietly consumed. As we moved to the dining room, Wolfe paused beside me. One more thing, he said. I waited. He turned his head, not quite facing me. No clove, ever again. And that, as far as I'm concerned, was the last course.